Arsen Ostrovsky. Arsen is an international human rights lawyer. He joins us from Tel Aviv this morning, where he heads the International Legal Forum. Arsen, good morning. It's great to have you. You know, a lot of Americans saw two stories this week, one about UNRWA and one about the ICJ, neither of which we're very familiar with. And I'm a pretty good lawyer, but I hadn't ever known about the ICJ having the ability to receive a complaint about genocide from a third party country and act on it. And I'd never, ever heard of UNRWA. And I follow Israel pretty much every day on the show. Let's start with UNRWA, what it is, and then let's go to the ICJ and what it did.
Sure. First of all, Hugh, thank you for having me on. It's really a pleasure and honor to be here with you, and very much admire your show and indeed your voice and your sense of moral clarity, which I think is quite lacking for so many today. But I'm very happy to see it on your show. Look, regarding UNRWA, UNRWA was created in 1949, basically in the wake of the Arab armies or Arab countries' failure to defeat the State of Israel upon its independence in 1948. And it was meant to be a temporary agency, temporary body created by the UN to help alleviate, to help resettle the so-called Palestinian refugees. It was meant to be a temporary agency. Fast forward 75 years later, UNRWA has not resettled a single Palestinian refugee, not a single one. Instead, what it has done, it has perpetuated this conflict. It has acted as an incubator for incitement, for hatred, for division. It has taken billions of dollars, literally in taxpayer dollars, including quite a lot from the United States. And quite often, instead of that money going towards the people of Gaza, we've seen it being siphoned by Hamas terrorist group. Now, the other quite preposterous thing is that you have, at the United Nations, you have one agency devoted solely to Palestinian refugees, which, by the way, has one unique definition to what a refugee even is. It keeps going on in perpetuity, meaning a third, fourth, fifth generation Palestinian could be a refugee. So someone like Bello or Gigi Haddad can be considered so-called Palestinian refugees, which is, preposterous. So you have one agency for Palestinian refugees, and you have one agency for refugees for the entire world. That is the absurdity we're looking at.
And how big is UNRWA? Because I was stunned by the amount of money and by the number of employees. Gaza's not that big. I know it's 2.5 million people, but like the Beltway, this would be the biggest not-for-profit going in the Beltway if it was in the Beltway. But it turns out that all of the UN schools that I thought were UN schools and a lot of the UN activities that I thought were good government activities turns out to have been whole or in part co-opted by and used by Hamas. And I was not aware of that until this week.
Look, I think that UNRWA has been the biggest Ponzi scheme, quite simply, in the history of the United Nations. Really quite fitting that it falls within the UN system itself. It's hard to even estimate how many billions of dollars have poured into UNRWA, including from the United States, from Europe as well. Interestingly, very little money, relatively very little money coming from the Arab community itself, which I think is telling in and of itself. But it's UNRWA. It's in some ways it's really just blown to this massive issue in the last few days. And some people are saying, we are shocked. We're shocked to hear some of the revelations coming from the Wall Street Journal and New York Times. But quite frankly, there is no need to be shocked. Those of us really that have been following this, are about as shocked at these revelations as we were to hear that, the Pope was Catholic, pardon my pun. For years now, we have pleaded with UN officials, we've pleaded with members of Congress and European lawmakers, look at what UNRWA is doing. You're receiving hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and that money is going towards hiding rockets in UNRWA schools and facilities. We have seen even during this war, UNRWA cement bags that are meant to go towards construction for the Palestinian people, we have seen that instead going towards the terror tunnels, the same tunnels that Hamas is now keeping hostages, not only Israeli, but also American hostages as well. We have seen their books riddled with the most vile, intense anti-Semitism, incitement, glorification of Hamas, and even glorification of Hitler and the Nazis as well. And then this week we have, the bombshell reports from the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, and of course the hearing in Congress as well, which is, I'm happy to talk on that as well. But that's something that's
Well, I
just
really am.
quite,
I'm more interested now in what the victims of 10/7 do. There is a statute in the United States called the Alien Tort Claims Act. It's been used before by the victims of the Hannock-Teller-Wren massacre back in the late 70s. And I was on the D.C. circuit when it got up to the circuit, and I worked for one of the judges for whom it was a problem. But the Alien Tort Claims Act allows victims, foreign victims, to sue in the United States court for damages in relation to the injuries they've suffered. It seems to me that UNRWA is now liable, as is every employee, as is everyone else involved with Gaza. Do you share that opinion, Arsen?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a number of different avenues to pursue, both legal, political, and obviously diplomatic. Just in the last 48 hours, a major civil action has been filed in the US by victims, including dual Israeli and American victims, in this case suing Iran for $1 billion. Of course, we know that Iran, along with Qatar, is the sponsor of Hamas. They fund them, they provide them with money, with weapons, with training, and quite frankly, Hamas operates at the behest of the Islamic Republic of Iran. With respect to UNRWA, there's a number of angles. UNRWA as an agency does enjoy a sense of diplomatic immunity, but
Okay,
one
that's
thing
what I was
that
getting at.
but it's not so clear, because one thing, for example, that we have done together with our colleagues in the National Jewish Advocacy Center and other lawyers is we actually filed a submission to the IRS. Now there is UNRWA. Now we're talking. There is the UNRWA agency, and then in the US you have UNRWA USA. UNRWA USA is a 501c3 charitable institution which has as one of its key pillars, key missions, to fundraise for UNRWA. So any US citizen that donates to UNRWA USA, they do so under the 501c3 charitable status. They get tax deductions, and that money then goes to UNRWA. For 2022, they raised almost $4 million for UNRWA, the single largest private donation to UNRWA. So what we have said is that is a breach of the federal legislation, including with respect to the IRS, because that money is going to a group that is actively involved in terrorism, in violence against US policy, and noting especially that now we have not only the United States, but 20 countries around the world that have frozen funds to UNRWA precisely because of these incredible, alarming allegations that UNRWA staff were not only passive participants, but they were active participants on a wide scale in the Hamas terror attacks of October 7, including committing the attacks, procuring weapons, holding Israelis hostage, cheering this on. And one of the most striking figures was that, a lot of people have said, well, this is just a few bad apples. Hugh, this is not a few bad apples. This is an entire organization that is rotten to the core, with over 10%, 1,200 staff of UNRWA in Gaza are directly connected to Hamas and Islamic Jihad. UNRWA is not any kind
that's
of...
what, Arsen, that raises to me the question. I don't want to geek out on our audience here, but there's an ultra vires doctrine where an employee goes out of their way to do something that's got nothing to do with their employment. The employer becomes culpable for what they do. I know they have diplomatic immunity at the UN, but aren't there other places where lawfare can be directed? And let's broaden it out to South Africa as well, because it seems to me that South Africa also ought to be in the sights of anyone who wants to strike back against the lawfare and the terror being waged against Israel.
Absolutely. Now, look, with UNRWA, it's a little bit more difficult because of that diplomatic immunity within the UN system, as much as we might loathe it. But there are a number of other buttons we can press. Certainly, IRS is one option. Within Congress, we've already seen a number of bills, including one by Brian Mast and a number of others, that have been put to disband and defund UNRWA. At the end of the day, money talks, certainly when it comes to this kind of organization. With respect to South Africa, very interesting. South Africa launched the claim against Israel for genocide. And it's, the most incredible subversion, not only a travesty of and a mockery of human rights, but really a travesty and a perversion of the very meaning of the word genocide. Now, it's not Israel that ought to have been on trial there, but but Hamas, but not only Hamas, and I'll go one step further, South Africa itself, because under the Genocide Convention, what we're seeing is that South Africa, in fact, are the ones that are embracing Hamas and embracing the Iranian regime. They're also embracing Russians and Chinese and others, but specifically Iran and Hamas. Though these two entities, they are the ones that are not only committing acts of genocide, which is what Hamas did, but with the Iranian regime obviously inciting and being very open about their intentions of annihilating the state of Israel. So now you have South Africa that is embracing these two genocidal regimes. So in fact, South Africa, the ones that are in breach of their obligation on the Genocide Convention, and I would very much support and recommend and certainly suggest that action be taken against them.
Arsen, tell our audience about they now see Arsen Ostrovsky on the air and they're listening. How do they help you out? What is the name of the organization that does the most lawfare on behalf of Israel? And by lawfare, I mean using the courts to defend the Jewish state. What's the name of it? How do people find you?
The organization is called the International Legal Forum. We're an Israel-based group, but we have a global coalition of some 4,000 lawyers around the world, including many in the United States. And our primary mission is very simple. It's to use the law to not only defend the state of Israel, defend the Jewish people, and quite frankly, defend our shared common democratic values, which we very much share in Israel and the United States. Because when you see these kinds of lawfare attacks against Israel, it's not only Israel that's affected, the US is affected as well. Because when someone goes to the ICJ and the court sets such an incredibly low threshold, you create a preposterous situation where someone like China, North Korea for that matter, Iran even, as signatories, they could file a claim of genocide against the US and potentially put US military forces in danger. What it can do is it can hamper and constrain and tie with one hand behind our backs democracy's ability to fight terrorism. It's incredible.
That which gets rewarded gets repeated. We're going to see them do this again and again. And I hope, Arsen, that you keep coming back. International Legal Forum. Go Google it. Find out where Arsen can be found and help them out. Maybe if you're in the United States, become a participating lawyer. Lawfare matters a lot, and both sides have to use it. The International Legal Forum.